At dawn, the narrow alleys of Morro da Esperança shimmered with golden light that spilled over the corrugated rooftops. The smell of roasted coffee and sweet bread drifted through the air, blending with laughter and music that pulsed from every corner. It was not an ordinary morning. It was the day the entire favela had been waiting for. The wedding of Marielle Costa, the woman everyone simply called Mari. Mari was 27, a nurse who worked tirelessly at the small clinic near the foot of the hill. She was known for her calm voice and steady hands, the kind of person who could silence panic with a single look. Her story was one of survival and compassion. Orphaned at 16, she had raised her younger brother while finishing nursing school, often walking miles to work because she couldn't afford the bus fare. In a place where many people didn't live to see 30, Mari was a symbol of hope. Her fiancé, Luis Prado, was a mechanic, quiet and thoughtful. He had fixed every broken motorbike in the neighborhood at least once, usually accepting payment in whatever people could offer. Food, favors, or sometimes just gratitude. He and Mari had known each other since childhood. Their love grew slowly, built not on grand gestures, but on shared moments, walking home together from church, helping neighbors rebuild after the floods, laughing under tin roofs during the rainy season. To everyone in Morro da Esperança, their wedding was more than a celebration of love. It was a reminder that beauty could still exist amid struggle. The ceremony took place in the courtyard of Mari's family home, a two-room house painted a fading shade of turquoise. Flowers made of recycled plastic hung from the ceiling beams, and fairy lights borrowed from 3 different families blinked like stars overhead. Music blared from a small speaker connected to an old phone. Children danced barefoot in the dust, while the older residents watched from plastic chairs, smiling. Mari wore a dress she had sewn herself, simple white fabric trimmed with lace from a thrift store. Her veil was made from mosquito netting, but it looked radiant in the morning light. When she walked down the narrow path lined with neighbors, people clapped and cheered. Someone set off fireworks, sending bursts of red and silver into the sky. For a few hours, it felt as if Morro da Esperança had escaped the world's problems. But beneath the laughter and celebration, something darker stirred. Police helicopters had been circling the area more often in recent weeks. Strange cars with tinted windows were seen parked near the base of the hill at night. Rumors spread that a large-scale police operation was coming, one of those raids that started before dawn and ended in blood. Most people ignored the gossip. After all, rumors were constant in the favela. Yet Mari's cousin, Renato Figueira, had stopped attending family gatherings. He had vanished a month earlier, and the whispers said he was now leading a small drug faction that controlled part of the neighborhood. Mari didn't like to talk about Renato. As children, they had been close, but their paths had split long ago. She chose the clinic and a quiet life. He chose power and danger. Still, she couldn't completely shake the thought that he might be hiding somewhere nearby, watching her wedding from the shadows. As evening approached, the celebration continued under strings of dim lights. People drank homemade cachaça and sang songs that echoed down the alleyways. Mari sat beside Luis, holding his hand, her head resting on his shoulder. The sound of laughter mixed with the distant hum of helicopters far above the city. For a moment, she thought she saw something unusual. A figure on a rooftop across the street, wearing black and holding what looked like binoculars. When she looked again, it was gone. Night deepened, and one by one, the guests began to leave. Mari and Luis stood in the doorway of their home, waving goodbye, surrounded by the soft glow of candles. They were exhausted but happy. Inside, the small house smelled of flowers and cake. Mari placed her wedding bouquet in a jar of water and looked out the window at the lights of Rio far below. She whispered a silent prayer for peace, for herself, for Luis, and for the people of Morro da Esperança. Somewhere in the distance, an engine rumbled. The sound was heavy and mechanical, not the usual traffic of the hill. Mari frowned but brushed it off. She had no way of knowing that the noise she heard was the first sign of what was coming. That within hours, those same streets filled with music and laughter would be soaked in silence and fear. The bride of Morro da Esperança had no idea her name would soon become part of Brazil's deadliest tragedy. At 3:47 a.m., the first gunshots shattered the silence over Morro da Esperança. The night had been heavy with humidity, and mist hung low over the rooftops. Most of the residents were still asleep when armored trucks began crawling up the steep road that cut through the favela. Helicopters hovered above, their spotlights slicing through the darkness like search beams. Operation Purity had begun. Inside the command vehicles, Officers from Rio's Special Operations Battalion prepared for what their superiors promised would be a decisive strike against organized crime. Their target was a list of 18 suspected gang leaders accused of trafficking, murder, and extortion. Among them was Renato Figueira, Mari Costa's cousin. To the outside world, it looked like a standard anti-narcotics mission, but those who lived in the favelas knew that raids rarely went according to plan. Once the first bullet flew, there was no distinction between target and bystander. Within minutes, the operation spiraled into chaos. Soldiers kicked down doors, shouting commands that were drowned out by gunfire. Explosions erupted as grenades shattered walls and windows. Children screamed as bullets punched through the thin tin walls of their homes. The air filled with smoke and the metallic smell of blood. People hid under beds, behind refrigerators, wherever there was space. Mary woke to the sound of the first explosion, her heart hammering in her chest. For a moment she thought it was a nightmare, but the screams outside were real. Luis pulled her down to the floor as bullets cracked through the window. Their small home shook under the pressure of nearby blasts. The music and laughter from their wedding were replaced by chaos. Mary's white dress, still hanging by the door, fluttered as the wind blew through the shattered glass. She crawled toward her medical kit. The instinct to help was stronger than her fear. Through a gap in the wall, she could see neighbors running for cover. A teenage boy stumbled in front of her house, clutching his arm, blood pouring through his fingers. Without thinking, Mary darted outside, dragging him inside before another round of shots tore through the street. She pressed a towel against his wound and whispered for him to stay still. The boy was trembling, his face pale, but he was alive. Outside, the firefight intensified. The police moved deeper into the favela, firing into houses they claimed were hiding fugitives. Helicopters sprayed bullets from above. By 5 a.m., the power grid failed, and the entire hillside went dark. Only the flashes of gunfire lit the night. The sound was deafening. Short bursts of automatic rifles, punctuated by explosions that rattled the ground. By sunrise, the narrow streets were unrecognizable. Smoke hung over the favela like a storm cloud. Bodies lay scattered in the alleys, men, women, and children. The police moved methodically through the debris, checking for survivors, their boots splashing through pools of rainwater and blood. In total, 132 people were dead. It was the highest number of casualties ever recorded in a single raid in Rio's history. The government wasted no time releasing a statement. Officials called Operation Purity a strategic success and praised the bravery of the officers who had eliminated dangerous criminals. On national television, the Minister of Public Security declared that the people of Rio were now safer. But within the favela, the story was very different. Families searched for missing relatives. Mothers wept beside the bodies of their sons. Local community leaders demanded to know why so many innocent lives had been lost. Mary's house was riddled with bullet holes. Her hands were stained with blood that wasn't hers. She had saved 2 wounded neighbors and tended to others until the police forced everyone out into the street for questioning. Her wedding dress was still hanging on the door, marked with a single tear from a bullet that had grazed her shoulder during the chaos. As she stood among the survivors, Mary watched officers carry black bags to the trucks lined up at the bottom of the hill. She couldn't tell if they contained weapons, money, or bodies. The soldiers moved quickly, silent, efficient, as if they were trying to erase the evidence of what had really happened. When journalists arrived later that morning, they were kept at a distance. Only sanitized images were released to the media. Weapons seized, drugs confiscated, smiling officers posing beside armored vehicles. The true devastation, the dead children, the burned homes, the terrified survivors, remained unseen. That night, as the city below returned to its normal rhythm, Morro da Esperança was eerily quiet. The electricity had not yet been restored. The streets smelled of smoke and dust. Mary sat alone in her house, the boy she saved sleeping on the floor beside her. Her shoulder ached from the wound, but she barely noticed. She could still hear the echoes of the gunfire in her mind, like ghosts refusing to fade. She didn't know it yet, but her survival made her a witness to something far larger than a police operation. The truth of Operation Purity was already slipping away, buried under official lies and silence. And for those who had seen what really happened, including Mary, the danger was only beginning. 3 days after the raid, Morro da Esperança was unrecognizable. The air still carried the bitter smell of gunpowder and burned wood. Houses stood hollow and blackened. their walls shredded by bullets. The few residents who remained moved like shadows, speaking in whispers and glancing nervously at the police checkpoints that now surrounded the hill. Dozens were missing, their names written on scraps of paper pinned to a broken notice board near the old grocery store. Among them was Mary Costa. The government had already closed the case in the public eye. Newspapers ran headlines celebrating a major victory against drug factions. Television anchors repeated the official count, 132 dead, all criminal suspects. There was no mention of Mary or of the many residents with no record, no weapon, and no way to defend themselves. Her husband, Luis Prado, refused to accept what he was told. Police claimed Mary had died in the crossfire, but they could not produce her body or any evidence. Her name was missing from the official casualty list. Luis searched hospitals, morgues, and police stations, only to be met with silence or confusion. Some officers told him she had been buried already. Others said she had never existed in their records. Then, on the third night after the raid, a video appeared online. It was grainy and shaky, filmed on a mobile phone, uploaded anonymously to social media before it vanished hours later. The clip showed armed men in police uniforms moving through what looked like Mary's street. They were loading boxes labelled evidence into a dark van. For a brief moment, the camera caught a face behind them, pale, terrified, unmistakably Mary's. She was alive, her hands bound, being pushed into the same van. The video spread quickly before disappearing, taken down from every platform within minutes. But not before Luis saw it. He froze, replaying the few seconds of Mary's face over and over until the screen went black. He knew then that she had not died. She had been taken. He began to record everything: phone calls, conversations, any small detail that could lead him to her. Friends warned him to stop, to leave the city. But Luis couldn't. Mary was his wife, and she had vanished under the protection of those sworn to uphold the law. His search led him deep into a maze of corruption. At first, he spoke with a few sympathetic journalists, but most refused to publish anything. They said they couldn't confirm the video's authenticity. Some admitted off record that the police had threatened to cut access to crime scenes if the story ran. Luis found himself followed by unmarked cars. His phone began to ring with silent calls in the middle of the night. Then he met a source who called herself Irene. She claimed to work in the logistics division of the Special Operations Battalion. Through encrypted messages, she told him that Operation Purity had not been a standard anti-gang raid at all. It was part of a larger agreement between certain state officials and a private military contractor known as Orion Tact. The company had been quietly purchasing land across Rio's hillsides under shell corporations. The favelas, overcrowded and undervalued, were standing in the way of luxury real estate projects. The raid, Irene said, was a cover, a way to clear the land under the guise of fighting crime. Luis didn't want to believe it, but the pieces fit. The day after the raid, construction trucks had already been seen near the base of the hill. Within a week, surveyors arrived, marking boundaries and taking soil samples. It was as if the future had been planned long before the shooting began. He began documenting everything, keeping backups of each file. Late at night, he returned to Morro da Esperança, walking among the ruins with his phone flashlight, photographing walls still scarred by bullets. He noticed something strange in one of the abandoned police tents, a clipboard listing confiscated items. Among them was an entry marked Subject MC, secured. The initials froze him, Mary Costa. He sent copies of the note to Irene, but she didn't respond again. 2 days later, her account was deleted. Desperate, Luis leaked the information anonymously online, but it barely spread before being buried under new headlines. The government announced another anti-narcotic success in a different favela. Public attention shifted, and Operation Purity faded from the news cycle. Still, whispers grew in underground forums and activist circles that a woman in a white dress had been seen alive after the massacre taken by men in uniform. Luis became obsessed. He printed flyers with Mary's photo and plastered them around the city. Most were torn down within hours. He didn't care. Every night he told himself that if the world had forgotten her, he never would. What he didn't know was that his search for Mary was about to lead him into the center of a conspiracy that reached higher than he could imagine. And the truth, when he finally uncovered it, would be more horrifying than the massacre itself. Months passed, and the story of Operation Purity began to fade from the headlines. Officials called it one of the most successful police actions in Rio's history, and most of the city moved on. The favela of Morro da Esperança remained a scar on the hillside, half abandoned and patrolled by private guards. For those who had lived through the raid, life was a quiet struggle to forget. But rumors continued to spread. Rumors that Mary Costa, the bride who had vanished that night, was still alive. Luis Prado refused to give up, even when everyone around him told him to stop asking questions. His job at the repair shop disappeared after unknown men visited his employer. His landlord suddenly raised his rent. Friends stopped returning his calls. Still, he kept searching. He spent nights tracing digital footprints, scanning forums, reading anonymous posts claiming to have seen a woman in white near the outskirts of the city. He was certain that Mary was being held somewhere, hidden in plain sight. Then, an unexpected ally appeared. Beatriz Silva, an independent journalist known for exposing government corruption, contacted him after receiving an anonymous package. Inside were encrypted files and a note that read, "For BS, the truth they buried. Witness 13. The data contained aerial maps of Morro da Esperança taken days before the raid, internal memos between Orion-tacked executives, and financial transfers to high-ranking police officers. The documents proved that Operation Purity had been coordinated not by the government alone, but by Orion-tacked, under a contract that guaranteed complete civilian displacement and neutralization of threats. One file stood out, a video labeled Witness 13. It opened with a dimly lit room. Dozens of people sat on the floor, blindfolded and silent. Behind them, a metal door bore the emblem of Orion-tacked. The camera panned slowly, and there she was, Mary. Her hair was cut short, her face bruised, her wedding dress torn but still recognizable. She stared at the camera with hollow eyes. A voice off-screen instructed her to speak. Mary began reciting a prepared statement in a trembling voice, saying that the police had acted lawfully and that the operation had saved her from criminals in her community. Her words sounded forced, rehearsed, like something she had been made to repeat many times. The footage ended abruptly. Beatrice and Luis were shaken. They watched the video over and over, pausing on every frame, analyzing the shadows, the logo on the wall, the way Mary's lips trembled when she said the word safe. They realized the video had been recorded after the raid, likely inside one of Orion-tacked's private facilities. The revelation changed everything. This wasn't just corruption. It was abduction, evidence tampering, and mass murder disguised as law enforcement. Beatriz began preparing a report that would expose the truth. She contacted international journalists, human rights groups, and lawyers willing to help publish the story. But the closer she got to finishing, the more dangerous her life became. Her office was broken into twice. Her car tires were slashed. Anonymous messages warned her to stop. One morning, as she arrived at her apartment, she found a small white envelope under her door. Inside was a photograph of Mary from the video, along with a note. She stayed silent. So should you. Still, Beatrice refused to back down. She backed up the files across multiple servers and arranged to meet Luis one last time before publishing. They met in a small cafe near the port, where Beatrice promised that the report would go live within 48 hours. She handed him a USB drive, a duplicate of the evidence, and told him to keep it hidden. That night, Beatrice never made it home. Her phone went offline at 9:22 p.m., and her car was found abandoned the next morning. Within days, her office was raided by unidentified agents, and all her equipment was seized. The official report claimed she had fled the country, but the people who knew her understood she was gone. Despite the risks, fragments of her investigation leaked online. The video of Mary circulated across encrypted networks before being removed again and again. Yet, each time it reappeared, it spread faster. Protesters gathered in Rio's city centre holding signs with Mary's image. The woman in the white dress. She became the symbol of the victims of Operation Purity, the face of the truth the authorities tried to bury. Government officials dismissed the protests as propaganda. Orion-tackt released a statement denying involvement in any unlawful detainment, claiming the footage was digitally manipulated. But Luis knew better. He watched as the streets filled with people chanting Mary's name. For the first time since the raid, he felt a flicker of hope and fear, because now everyone was watching, and the people responsible were desperate to silence anyone who knew too much. Luis understood what that meant. Beatrice's disappearance was not the end of the story. It was the warning that the final chapter was about to begin. A year passed before the government officially closed the investigation into Operation Purity. The final report, hundreds of pages long, concluded that all 132 people killed during the raid were members or affiliates of criminal organizations. It stated that no civilians had been harmed and that the operation had restored order to a high-risk zone. The report was signed by several senior officials, some of whom later took positions in Orientac's expanding network of private security projects. For most of the country, the story ended there. For those who lived in Morro da Esperança, silence became the only language of survival. The favela itself no longer existed. Bulldozers cleared what was left of the homes, leveling the hill to make space for a luxury housing complex. The new development was marketed as a vision of urban renewal. Modern apartments with sea views, a private gym, and manicured gardens. The project's name was unveiled at a lavish ceremony attended by politicians, investors, and police commanders. Residential Mari. Cameras flashed as officials praised the transformation of a dangerous zone into a symbol of hope. No one mentioned the woman whose name they had stolen. Luis Prado did not live to see that ceremony. 2 months before the grand opening, his body was found in his car on the road to Niterói. The police called it a suicide, citing a note typed on his phone that read, "I can't live with the past anymore." But those who knew him doubted it. He had been preparing to meet with a lawyer from an international human rights group. He had been talking about new evidence, about a lead that could prove Mari had been moved to a secret facility outside the city. The note on his phone didn't sound like him. The spelling was wrong, the tone distant. Yet the case was closed within 48 hours. Weeks later, a fisherman named Antonio Silva made an unexpected discovery while working near the coast. He was clearing debris from his nets when he pulled up a small waterproof container wrapped in cloth. Inside were several memory cards and a folded piece of paper with 3 words written in faint ink. For the truth. Antonio turned the container over to a local activist group, which quickly realized what it contained. Documents, photographs, and encrypted videos from the same data leak Beatriz Silva had been investigating before she vanished. Among the files were communication logs between Orientac executives and high-ranking police officials. The messages discussed budgets, tactical movements, and post-operation media coordination. One message mentioned Mari directly, referring to her as Subject MC, the same code Luis had found on the confiscation list. Another file contained surveillance photos showing her standing beside 2 officers outside a warehouse. The timestamp was dated 12 days after the raid. The last video in the folder was different. It was a single, unedited recording of Mari herself. She appeared weaker, sitting in a small concrete room with a single light bulb above her. Her voice was soft but steady. She said she had been taken with dozens of others after the operation, forced to sign documents stating they had been rescued from criminals. Those who refused were never seen again. She spoke about Orientac, about the officers who visited the site to film staged confessions. Her words were calm, almost detached, as if she knew her message would be her last. Near the end of the video, her expression changed. She looked directly into the camera and whispered, "They said this is for a cleaner city, but a city built on blood cannot be clean." The recording ended there. The files briefly circulated online before disappearing. Journalists who tried to publish them found their websites hacked, their archives wiped clean. A few smaller outlets shared fragments, but the story never broke on a national level. The people who pushed too hard faced anonymous threats, lawsuits, or quiet disappearances. The evidence that could have changed everything was buried again, this time under digital silence. Still, whispers continued to spread. Some said copies of the files were hidden in multiple locations, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Others claimed Mari's voice could still be heard in the static of certain intercepted broadcasts, a myth that gave her story the weight of legend. The residents who had survived the raid sometimes left flowers near the gates of residential Mari. Security guards removed them, but new ones always appeared the next morning. At night, from the high balconies of the new towers, lights flickered where Mari's home once stood. Locals said that if you looked closely, you could see the faint outline of a woman in white walking through the shadows, her dress glowing beneath the moonlight. They said she wandered the hills searching for the truth that had been erased, a ghost born not from death, but from injustice. And so, in the heart of the new city, surrounded by glass towers and silence, the story of Mari Costa lived on, not in official records or history books, but in the whispers of those who remembered her. The bride of Morro da Esperança, taken on her wedding night, had become the symbol of everything the government tried to forget. Her name, carved into the luxury towers above the graves of the people she once cared for, stood as the cruelest monument of all. A reminder that justice, in Brazil's deadliest raid, was buried beneath the very foundation it claimed to build.